Good morning. Welcome to UU Church of Canandaigua, New York. I'm Eileen, your minister. This morning, our preacher is C.B. Beal. They are a UU speaker, preacher, storyteller coming to join us from Massachusetts. And I'm so delighted CB is with us this morning. Before we begin our service, I have a few quick announcements to share, and I want to share my screen so that I can get all this information for you. I want to let you know that the UUCC board is looking for a hobby historian or potential archivist to do an archives, a church history project. So if you've got some time to kill, you're looking for a pandemic project, if you love to look through records or files or old photos, let us know. You can email Laura. Her email address is on the screen. And then we are hosting a pie fundraiser for the church for Thanksgiving. There'll be pies available the week of Thanksgiving. So if you're a pie eater, just hang in there. For right now, if you're a pie baker and you want to share your skills, we would love to have them. Or if you're a licensed driver, not so much a baker, but you like to drive around, you'd like to make some deliveries. Drivers or bakers, you can email Gigi. Her email address is on the screen to find out how you might help. And then I'm looking for photos of your ancestors, whether they're your actual genetic ancestors, emotional or spiritual ancestors, those people who formed you and who have passed on. We want to honor them in our service next week. So if you could send those photos to me by Tuesday, if you still haven't, but you want your ancestors to be honored, please do. You can send me multiple photos. And if you already sent some, but you forgot great grandma and she needs to be in there, go ahead and send some more. And then we're in the midst of a contract to call process. And we've got 2 more discernment sessions where we listen to one another about what is the ministry that this church needs and what is the ministry that we might do together. One of them is right after this service on family ministry and religious education. So stick around after worship in lieu of coffee hour. We will have one of those discernment sessions right after the service. And then finally, on election night, we will have a Vespers service, which is just a quiet evening service, if that's a foreign word to you. We're going to join our Rochester UU siblings from First Unitarian and First Universalist in Rochester at 7 p.m. for a quiet contemplative service about half an hour long. If you need to just check out of the constant news streaming or anxiety and check in to be in community, we'll do that on the 3rd at 7 p.m. Friends, let's take a deep breath in together. Let us enter a space of worship.
We're going to light our chalices now. If you have a real chalice or an imaginary chalice, go ahead and grab that. And I'm going to read the chalice lighting words. So we gather this hour as people of faith with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning in celebration of the life we share together.
Our opening words this morning are the words of Rainer Maria Rilke from Letters to a Young Poet. Have patience with everything unresolved in your heart and try to love the questions themselves as if they were locked rooms or books written in a very foreign language. Don't search for the answers which could not be given to you now, because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps then, someday, far into the future, you will gradually, without even noticing it, live your way into the answer.
Good morning. Our first hymn today is number 347, Gather the Spirit. Gather the Spirit, harvest the power, as our separate fires rekindle one flame. To witness the mystery of this hour, our trials in this life appear all the same. Gather in peace, gather in thanks, gather in sympathy now and then. Gather in hope, compassion and strength. Gather to celebrate once again. Gather the spirit of heart and mind. Seeds for the sowing are laid in store, nurtured in love and conscience refined, with body and spirit uniting as one. Gather in peace, gather in thanks, gather in sympathy now and then. Gather in hope, compassion and strength. Gather to celebrate once again. Gather the Spirit growing in all, drawn by the moon and led by the sun. Winter to spring and summer to fall, the chorus of life resounding as one. Gather in peace, gather in thanks, gather in sympathy now and then. Gather in hope, compassion and strength. Gather to celebrate once again.
This morning, I'm going to tell a story originally penned by Kyle McClear. Now, it's a picture book, so I'm going to tell you ahead of time that the characters in this story are a spork, its parents, the fork and spoon, and various other cutlery. Later in the story, a toddler comes upon the scene quite suddenly. Spork was neither spoon nor fork, but a bit of both. Spork had two parents who both thought that Spork was perfectly sporky. but Spork stuck out. In the kitchen, forks were forks and spoons were spoons. Cutlery customs were closely followed. Mixing was uncommon. The forks and the spoons knew who they were and what they were for. Now, naturally, there were rule breakers, knives who loved chopsticks and tongs who married forks, but such families were unusual. Spork spent most of their time tucked in the bottom corner of that back drawer in the kitchen. You know the drawer, the one with the 5 corn-on-the-cob forks and the 3 plastic straws and the old can opener that we keep that sticks, that's for when the good one has gone missing. We all have that drawer. When Spork came out of the drawer to sit on the countertop, the other utensils would say hi and move on, or they'd forget that they'd met Spork many times before, or they'd ignore Spork completely, or they'd ask intrusive questions. One day, after the billionth time, Spork was asked, "Have you been coming here long?" And, "What are you anyway?" And, "Has your body always been like that?" And the zillionth time Spork was passed over when the table was set, Spork sighed and thought, it must be easier to be a single thing. And Spork decided to try and pick just one thing to be. Spork thought to start by fixing their head, and so put on a bowler hat to look more spoonish. But the forks thought that Spork was too round. Then Spork made a paper crown to look more forkish, but the spoons thought that Spork was too pointy. Spork wondered if there were other lonely creatures out there with no matching kind who never got chosen to be at the table, who didn't really belong. They wondered if there was an egg beater rolling pin, or a garlic press ice cream scoop, or a spatula teapot. But Spork never met them. At dinner time, Spork watched from the counter while the spoons played pea hockey and skillfully balanced boiled eggs. Spork sat off to the side while the forks raked fancy patterns in the mashed potatoes and twirled noodles around in complicated circles like rhythmic gymnastics. And at the end of this and every other meal, Spork looked on while the others enjoyed a fabulous dip in the pool. There were even bubbles and a spongy massage. Spork was there, watching from the counter, then shuffled back to their drawer. But then one day, a messy thing arrived. This messy thing had obviously never heard of cutlery customs or table manners. It had its way with the spaghetti. It giggles to see the peas bounce in patterns of escape across the floor. No cutlery customs at all. This messy thing smeared and spilled and flung and clumped and dripped without a care. "Wait," said the forks, but the messy thing did not wait. "Careful," said the spoons, but the messy thing was not careful. "Oh, help," said the forks, while the messy thing continued to smear and slop and splatter. "Quick," said the spoons. They didn't know what to do with the messy thing. Now, a fork may be good for picking and poking, and a spoon may be fine for scooping and stirring, but this messy thing with its slurpy and clumpy half-finished food bits needed something different. Something that could do all sorts of things at once, something that was flexible and easy to hold, something that was neither spoon nor fork, but a bit of both. The utensils looked around and they saw Spork, and they immediately gasped and felt this mixture of excitement and relief and some embarrassment. Because that is when Spork leapt off the countertop over the cutlery drawer and landed on the high chair with a loud trumpet noise. The messy thing saw Spork, and it immediately froze. Its eyes got big. It gurgled its curiosity, and it grabbed Spork. And it waggled Spork up and down. It banged Spork on the top of the high chair. The messy thing was so happy. And that is the story of how Spork finally and happily found their way to the table. But the cutleries, having realized the mistake was theirs all along, immediately had a meeting, and they voted unanimously to make a plan to reorganize the kitchen drawers. They asked Spork what Spork needed, and others. They listened. They bore witness to lives they had previously not understood or even noticed. In the end, there was a space for Spork and a proper space for the 5 corn on the cob forks and the 3 plastic straws in the old can opener that sticks. They created new spaces that would properly fit the egg beater rolling pin, the garlic press ice cream scoop, and the spatula teapot. They learned about Spork, and they started to notice when they were unfriendly. They started interrupting each other if someone asked a rude or intrusive question. They stopped asking Spork and all their friends to prove their experience and instead just started learning about them. As they did these things, they learned more even about themselves than they thought they had already known. Why, they found out there was a whole subgroup of forks and spoons that would really prefer to play board games rather than spend so much time in the pool. And there were knives. There were some knives that wanted to hang out in the garage with the hatchets. They were so busy thinking they knew who they were and that they had all the proper customs. It hadn't occurred to them that they were already so many more things at one time. When they finished the kitchen remodel, they left a couple of spaces empty too. Spaces that were constructed with flexibility for whomever came next. The table was for all, so the organization had to be as well. And they all agreed that Spork was perfectly sporky. A little bit round, a little bit pointy. Just right.
Friends, this is a community where we hold one another in all of our biggest feelings, in our deepest sorrows, and in our greatest joys. And now is the time in our service to share with one another what is lying in our hearts today. So I invite you to use the chat function to share any joys or sorrows that you have to lift up this morning. Share them here. And then if you're watching this later on YouTube, you may use the comment section to share them there. And know that whatever you share or whatever is left in your heart, we are with you. Are there joys or sorrows to share this morning? This morning, we are holding joy that so many of you have found your way here, even though we know a mistaken link went out in our newsletter. I know you helped one another to get here. We're holding joy for a good story well told, for being oneself and being loved through it. We are tenderly thinking of Megan's grandparents, of church leaders of all kinds doing the big and small work that keeps us together, of Pat's truth-telling in the local paper. We are holding in our hearts Megan's brother with his new job and his new home. We are thinking of voters with joy and for those who facilitate voting. And we hold the joy of just being here together. These and all those joys and sorrows left unspoken in the quiet places within us, we hold together this morning, and we know that we are with one another. And now I invite you into the spiritual practice of generosity.
Now is the time in our service to join together in the spiritual practice of generosity. If you would like to give to this morning's offering, you can find a few ways to do so on the screen. You can give online at canandaiguauu.org/connect or physically by mailing a check to the church. In either case, note that you'd like your gift to go toward and we'll share 1/4 of it with our monthly service partner. And this month, our monthly service partner is aptly League of Women Voters. You can give to this morning's offering by visiting the link that I think that is in the chat right now. It's www.canandaiguauu.org/connection/donate, or again by mailing a check to the UUCC at 3024 Cooley Road in Canandaigua.
Now is the time in our service for quiet centering and meditation, followed by some shared silence. Let's take a deep breath in together and let it out with a sigh. Get comfortable in your seat. Maybe let some part of your body find the floor or the earth beneath you and feel supported. This meditation is called Bearing Witness. They gathered round the bed after his ventilator was withdrawn. Wife, daughters, sons, grandchildren, a cousin, a great-grandniece. They stood awkwardly, not touching the refreshments hospital staff had brought, a paltry offering to the god of death, in the form of a chilled 6-ounce orange juice and a stale peach Danish. They gathered round the bed to bear witness to this passing, sensing this part of the life should be part of the story too. But strangers milled about, machinery beeped while fluorescent lights flickered, and he looked a bit inhuman too, so far gone already. He left me a singing voicemail. A grandson's voice burst through the silence. On my birthday, he sang for like a minute. He was always doing stuff like that. I saved it. Suddenly, every phone emerged from every pocket, and the voice that had been stolen by intubation rang out in that small, strange room. He sang once more, twice more, a dozen times more. Every one of his beloveds carried his songs in their pockets, carried it in their hearts, held it up for the world to hear, but an offering for the god of death. Let us join in shared silence together.
14th century Sufi poet Hafez wrote, "Admit something. Everyone you see, you say to them, 'Love me.' Of course, you do not do this out loud, otherwise someone would call the authorities. Still though, think about this great pull in us to connect. Why not become the one who lives with the full moon in each eye, that is saying with that sweet moon language what every other eye in the world is dying to hear?" It can be said that Unitarians are a particularly wordy people. In fairness, I have to say that. I mean, look where I am and what I do for a living. Right? We spend a lot of time talking about what we think is true: politics, fixing what's wrong, teaching the children, about governance, polity, covenant. We think about something, we decide what's right, we take positions on things. None of that was what Spork needed. None of that was what Hafez was referencing. Those things are just part of the container for what we need. As much as we UUs love to think, talk, argue, and search for truth and meaning, these activities do not build trust. They build knowledge, they build awareness, and they might build the kind of connection that comes from striving together for common purpose. But talking about our ideas doesn't develop trust. Talking about our lives and having our truth received and held dear, that builds trust. Trust is not really a cognitive brain-based experience. It's primarily emotional. And if we're part of a religion and a religious tradition that prides itself in thinking, we have to work all the harder to be people who are trustworthy. Spork had no reason to trust the other utensils that were in charge, not simply because they ignored Spork, but also because they did not know about or care about Spork's life. They didn't know or care to make space for Spork, what Spork was like or what they needed or what they cared about. So Spork had no feeling of connection or care, and therefore no trust with them. In rearranging the kitchen drawers, the other utensils spoke with Spork and learned about Spork's life in the lives of others who are like Spork or simply unlike themselves. They realized that the problem wasn't just with the drawers, and the solution, therefore, would be to build a new one that was identical, only bigger, and be done with it. They connected with Spork in a way that meant that later on, they couldn't or wouldn't ignore Spork in another situation. They would know Spork deeply in trusting relationship. They would be in beloved community. Spork would trust them because they had made themselves trustworthy. They restructured the things by changing their perspective, their behavior, and their environment. In congregational life, with discussions about funding, polity, the next social justice project, we spend a lot of time searching for what is right, what is best. But if we're striving to be right, we're living in this cognitive brain, basically competing for rightness, and it becomes a battle. Now, this is not an inherently bad thing. In the right circumstances, competing for rightness, see what I did there? Competing for rightness, this battle is necessary, right? We battle sexism and patriarchy. We battle homophobia and trans misogyny, classism and systemic racial oppression. We battle police misconduct. We battle encroaching national fascism. And if that is our most common way of interacting, it interferes in beloved community. Bearing witness is something different. When we bear witness to people, we must consistently notice and set aside our own thoughts and assumptions, things that don't make sense to us yet because we don't have the whole picture. We must recognize when we are bearing witness that what someone is sharing may be so different from our experience, we have to work not to simply dismiss it. When we bear witness, it means we prioritize the story someone else wishes to tell over the questions we already have, or where we want their story to go and how we want it to end. When we can still our minds and be present with someone, we bear witness to another story, and then we're able to express empathy. We're able to say, wow, that must have been hard, or, oh my goodness, I am so sorry that happened. You did not deserve that. Or, that's amazing. I'm so honored that you told me that delightful story. When we tell the stories of our lives, people have the opportunity to hold space for the unveiling of more of us. And I don't mean here like chit chat about our kids' recital or a ski trip or humble bragging about a promotion, although those have important social places in our interactions. I mean, when we talk about things that are meaningful to us in a deep way, when we share our perspective and experience, and we find that the listener has received, held, acknowledged, and believe us. The person who receives our experience is a person who is trustworthy. See, this is not about ideas. But we so often don't experience that, do we? We all too often experience people trying to fix us or our situation, or worse, telling us that our experience is wrong. And it's all too often we who try to fix things for others. There's a term called gaslighting you might be familiar with. It means to manipulate someone into questioning their sanity. It comes from a movie of the same name, and in that movie, a man attempted to make his wife think that she was completely unwell, to question her own perceptions by, among other things, adjusting the lighting, a gas lamp, downward every day. And when she would say, "It's dark in here," he would say, "No, it's not." And this was repeated until he was pretending to read the newspaper in the pitch dark, and she questioned her ability to tell what was real. The goal of gaslighting is different than persuasion. It is manipulating someone to get them to disbelieve their own perception of reality and replace it with someone else's. It happens all too often. And I suggest it's something that we need to notice and look out for in our congregational lives. Now, people who are like Spork, people who do not experience their gender as being clearly man or woman in the Western culture's binary way where there's only two and they're opposite, but experience their gender as something else. These people are gaslit every single day. People say, there's no such thing as trans, or there's no such thing as non-binary. And the reasoning usually boils down to some version of, I'm not non-binary. It doesn't make sense to me. I don't believe you. Now, this is, of course, more broad. Those of us who are survivors of dysfunctional families and abuse, or survivors of illnesses like fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue, have often had other people tell us, that's not real. That didn't happen. We've experienced being surrounded by people who told us we were wrong or broken. Maybe others of us were told we were bad and lazy when it turned out we were just neurodiverse and no one knew what it was back then. We've experienced people tell us our perceptions differ from theirs, so it must be all in our heads, made up. Some version of, I don't have that. I've never heard of that. I haven't personally seen the science. I don't believe you. And this is even more broadly true for those of us who are survivors of and live with pervasive sexism, racism, homophobia, and ableism in our culture. I've never seen that oppression like you just described. I haven't seen it. I don't believe you. Now I have to admit, I must acknowledge that I've been on both sides of this. I've been both a person whose reality is challenged by someone else whose reality is different, and I've been the person who uses my own reality to judge others. Sometime you can have me back and I'll tell you those stories, because I am nothing if not my own cautionary tale. But for right now, I grew up in the 60s and 70s on a hardscrabble farm in Saranac, New York. Not the lake, the town, the little one. And before that, I come from about 400 years of Puritan New Englanders. I come from people with names like Harbot Grimscottle. And regardless of your personal family history, if you're Unitarian Universalist, you are deeply bound up in this history as well. I come from generations of people who, when someone dies, says, well, that's too bad, got to get on with it. I come from people for whom grieving is private and internal and set aside as quickly as possible. And empathy, if offered, is shaken off. Feelings are meant to be things that flashed past, darting like birds that never land. In our own judgment, we were raised to believe, is almost absolutely right. We were raised to believe that we always know best. I think this means that since I come from a long line of people who, because we were never able to sit with our grief, because we were never taught what it is to deeply experience what we're actually experiencing, our family cultures and our Puritan roots have led us to gaslight even ourselves. Our whole family denies one of the deepest and most profound emotions. And if we don't know how to sit with grief and sadness, how on earth can we truly have empathy for others? But grief isn't the only emotion our Puritan heritage has kept from many of us. When I was a kid, true story, I knew 3 feeling words: mad, sad, and what was the other one again? Oh yeah, mad. We weren't taught how to notice and honor and feel our own feelings. How could we possibly bear witness to others? Many of us were never taught how to sit with other people's feelings, with other people's stories. Sarah Jane would start to tell a story about the ruined bread she couldn't make. It wouldn't rise, and we'd interrupt them and ask if the yeast was primed or the oven was hot enough. We didn't want her to be sad. We didn't want to have to witness her sadness, because when we did, we also had deeply uncomfortable feelings, and we don't like that. So we tried to fix the problem instead of being present with her upset. John James might express his upset that his kid's Pinewood Derby racer kept getting stuck and how embarrassed his kid was. And we'd interrupt and we'd ask questions about what kind of wax was he using, and maybe he should shave a little more weight from the front. Then someone else would say, no, he should shave a little more weight off the back. And the next thing you know, we're fighting about the best way to weigh down a Pinewood Derby racer, but not at all about his feelings or his sense of powerlessness, about his kids' hard feelings. Eventually, some of us, realizing that what our families had taught us about life was less helpful than they had thought, or that our coping mechanisms that kept the feelings at bay accidentally turned into an alcohol problem, well, we joined support groups or recovery groups. Others of us stumbled into covenant groups and small group ministry. Many of us were confused and flummoxed when we first entered those rooms and found that people simply sat quietly listening while someone else talked. Why, they just rambled on and on. Others of us took to it like fish to water. Finally, a place where I can be seen. Some of us found ourselves judgmental of other people, taking up so much time talking about themselves. Oh my goodness, what an ego-driven thing, I thought. Wow, it sure is all about me in here. I'd been taught that anything about me was too much. But over time, I came to realize that no, this is how humans grow, connect, and develop trust in relationships. We learn that people will listen to us deeply, will let us share at our own pace, will believe what we say, will care for us even when it's hard for us to care for ourselves, will maintain our confidences and protect our privacy. For some of us, this was the absolute opposite of how we grew up. In small group ministry and covenant groups, recovery or therapy groups, we learned to just listen, to suspend judgment, to notice and dismiss, or at least question our own assumptions that kept coming up. And then we found ourselves doing it elsewhere, bearing witness to people. We started noticing and resisting the impulse to be right, or to tell someone what to do, or to fix it for them. Resisting the impulse to do anything that would move this feeling away from us. We bore witness to friends. We bore witness to colleagues. We sat and held space for people after tragedy and at death. We learned to be with someone's feelings without taking them in, to be empathetic and present without drowning in someone else's emotion. The next thing you know, we are bearing witness willy-nilly all over the place. In the supermarket, a man stood confused in front of the soup. I paused and said, "Are you okay? Can I help?" He asked me if I knew where the mushroom soup was. I said, "Well, there's a few different brands." Did he know which one he wanted? He told me he didn't really know. His wife had always cooked. For 50 years, his wife had always cooked, and he didn't know what to get now that she died. I stood there for 10, 12 minutes, and I listened to him talk about his wife and her cooking, how confusing the grocery store is, and how he regretted never going with her to shop. In the end, we identified that she made really creamy, mushroomy soup, and I helped him choose two to try. But mushroom soup was not what he needed that day. He had to buy it, sure, but what he needed was someone to see him, to bear witness to a way his life had completely changed, to how he was bereft and didn't know how he would continue moving forward. It was an honor to stand with him in that aisle. Willy-nilly, I tell you. When we are able to be present, just present with someone, we open ourselves and them up to possibilities. When we try not to control the possibilities or the outcome, but to just let it come, miracles of connection, of trust can happen. And what happens is nothing like what we expect. And it is so much more beautiful. Amen. As you go from this space and back into your life, go and bear witness. Willy-nilly, I tell you. Wear your mask, wash your hands, love your people, and let them love you.
Our closing hymn is number 318. We would be one. Give us just a moment. Let's go here. And you, yeah, okay, we're going to do this. Good, now we want to go. Okay. Now we can try again. One more time. Okay. There it is. Okay, now we're ready. We would be one, as now we join in singing our hymn of love, to pledge ourselves anew to that high cause of greater understanding of who we are and what in us is true. We would be one in living for each other, to show to all a new community. We would be one in building for tomorrow a nobler world than we have known today. We would be one in searching for that meaning which binds our hearts and points us on our way. As one we pledge ourselves to greater service, with love and justice strive to make us free.
And this brings us to the close of the sermon. So I'm going to extinguish our chalice. If you have one, you can extinguish that along with us. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.